Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's 10:40, so we'll get started. So what we're going to be talking about today is how identities come together, especially with cloud applications, and what are the challenges there, and what are the best practices, right? So my name is Krishna Narayanaswamy. I'm the co-founder and chief scientist at Netskope, and joining me today is Kartik, who's a principal engineer and architect at Netskope. So together we will present on this particular topic. You see a short agenda there. It's a 25-minute presentation. We'll try to keep it to about 20 minutes, and definitely if you have questions, feel free to ask. Right? So with that, let's get going. So one of the first things that we want to emphasize is there are a lot of changes happening in the way in which people do their work, right? First, there are a lot of enterprises moving to cloud applications. No longer are enterprises investing in building applications in their own data centers. And this goes towards all types of applications, right? It started with Salesforce, with CRM, but it's Salesforce, it's productivity apps like Office 365, cloud storage applications like Box, Dropbox, and so on. And the understanding of these applications is it is hosted throughout the internet. You need not come to one data center, so you can access it at any place and at any time. And that's exactly what we're seeing. What we're seeing is more than 50% of accesses to cloud applications happen outside your campus. So this is when people go home or at Starbucks or they're traveling in a subway, they're accessing these applications. And by having these applications hosted in the cloud, it makes it much more easier, right? And that's one of the reasons, again, why enterprises are adopting these applications. But one of the things that come with these cloud applications is enterprise-sensitive data is also moving to the cloud, right? And by moving to the cloud, now you have to take extra measures to protect the data, right? Ultimately, it's the data that the bad actors or the threat actors are going after, and it is the data that protects your brand. So if you want to protect your brand, or if you are in a compliance-driven industry, protecting your consumers' data is very important. And with this move to the cloud, you have to pay extra attention as to how you want to do that, right? And we'll get into some more details, right? So at Netskope, we have tracked over 22,000 cloud applications, right? So these are applications where you can log in and have a session and transact data, right? And these applications, again, as I said, it's growing. I would say about a year ago, it was 15,000. There's a lot of investment going on in building new applications that go across categories like software as a service, SaaS, infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, right? Now, based on data that we have collected at Netskope, what we have seen is there's a growing trend going back from 2014 through 2017. We have seen a steady increase in number of cloud applications that have been adopted in enterprises. So what data you're seeing here is data from real-world customers that we have tracked, right, as to the number of cloud applications they're using. In 2014, it was on an average, about 400 applications were being used in a typical enterprise. And fast forward to 2017, we are seeing over 1,000 applications, right? And this is an average enterprise. The smaller ones may have lesser than 1,000, but we have seen larger ones have even over 5,000 applications, right? Now, what are these applications and how do they get in? Now, when we look at that, we roughly break them into three categories, right? We start at the top with what we call sanctioned cloud applications. What we mean by sanctioned cloud applications are these are applications that IT departments have gone and procured and have admin control over. So they can log into the admin console of these applications and then set some policies and things like that, right? So those are sanctioned applications. Then you have the remaining, which are unsanctioned. The unsanctioned applications fall in two buckets. One is what is called the business-led, right? So here, the larger the organization, individual business groups go off and procure applications because they find it easier to get their job done. Now, they do not go through a central IT department And they just use the credit card, expense it, and voila, they're using those applications. Now, what is the problem with that? The problem with that is enterprise-sensitive data that has to be protected is also going to those applications. So unless you have visibility and control, it's very difficult to say what data is going where, right? So that's a big challenge. And then, of course, in today's workforce, you cannot have an ironclad environment where you say that you're not allowed to use any consumer apps, right? Almost everybody who comes to work expect it that they will be allowed to use social networking applications like LinkedIn and so on, where, again, those are consumer-led apps, but those are apps, again, where sensitive data can go. Like if you're in a financial services industry, things like recommendations on stocks to buy can happen over a LinkedIn messaging channel, right? So, again, that is also important to cover in terms of getting visibility and control. So you have the consumer-led, you have the business-led, and then you have the IT-led. So those are the three categories in which how apps, cloud applications come into enterprises. Now, one other point I want to make in the slide is how many of these apps are really enterprise ready? What do I mean by enterprise ready? Enterprise readiness. Enterprise readiness means that these apps have adequate controls to protect the data. For example, what data centers are these? Is the data stored? Now, once the data is pushed to these applications, who owns the data? Do you as the customer own the data, or does the app own the data, right? All this is specified in the licensing agreement, right, in the EULAs of these applications. But how many of the people who sign up for these applications, especially if it's not IT-led, go through the due diligence of identifying what the EULA says, who owns the data, is the data stored in what geographical locations, is the data encrypted at rest, and so on, right? So all those make it very important to identify if an application is enterprise ready or not. And in our experience, over 95% of the cloud apps that we find in enterprises are not enterprise ready, right? So what we call this the tip of the iceberg phenomenon, right? So what IT knows about is only the tip of a really bigger problem, right? So the IT may know about the 40, 50 applications and they've done the due diligence, sometimes maybe not, right? But the majority of that applications are below that water surface, right? Now, one of the things that that the industry as a whole has done is there is an alliance called the Cloud Security Alliance. It's called CSA. So CSA has come up with something called the Cloud Control Matrix, CCM, right? The Cloud Control Matrix is a set of attributes that identify if an application is cloud ready or not. It's enterprise ready or not, right? So there are solutions out there, Netskope being one, that takes those cloud control matrix attributes and assigns a score for every cloud app that is identified in your environment, right? So there's something called a cloud confidence index. That's a score that goes from 0 to 100. And so you can identify what applications are there in your environment and then assign and find out the cloud confidence index, and that will give you a picture of how many applications are there that are not really enterprise ready, where your sensitive data may be going, right? So, and needless to say, these cloud applications are not just your typical Dropbox box, right? Those are cloud storage applications that all of us know about, but it goes beyond that. If you go to things like marketing, finance, HR, there are hundreds of applications out there that make the processes in enterprises much more easier. So these organizations go off and acquire those applications, right? So this is what we call like the shadow IT problem. I'm sure you have heard about it. You have seen a lot of press and media coverage about shadow IT. Now, what we say, I mean, at least at Netskope, what we profess is you cannot go and block shadow IT. I mean, all these applications are there for a purpose, right? So the right way to do it is how do you safely enable shadow IT, right? That is the discussion you should have, and not say, hey, I'm going to go block shadow IT. I'm going to go block shadow IT, right? And what we're going to do today is give you some best practices on, especially with respect to identity management, being an identity conference, what can be done to get control of the shadow IT, provide those swim lanes where people can use these applications in a safe manner. So before I get to that, one other point that I would like to make is, I'm sure you're aware data breaches are happening all over, all the time. It can be, over the past few years, we go and look at it, like almost every year there are many, many data breaches that are happening. But my point of bringing up this slide is not just about data breaches, but if you look at data breaches, one of the common things that is being breached is user credentials, right? So you look at LinkedIn, I mean, if I were to ask how many of you had to change your passwords because of the LinkedIn breach? I had to do myself, right? So almost all of us have LinkedIn accounts, and when you have billion or hundreds of millions of user credentials breached, you obviously have to go change your credentials, right? Similarly, the Yahoo was another big one. So I can go on and on. As I said, when breaches happen, typically we think of breaches as going after things like PII information, like social security numbers, could be credit card numbers, and so on. But in reality, these days, the price commodity in breaches is user credentials. Because if you tie this with the movement of enterprises using cloud applications, right, where again, identity is the single way in which you can get into those applications, right? What is the point? I mean, many organizations go and spend millions of dollars of encrypting data, right? Encrypting data in the cloud. They say, oh, when I move to the cloud, I need to encrypt the data, right? Now, it's fine and dandy when you encrypt the data because it is obfuscated at storage time, right? But if credentials are breached, if somebody can log in as an authenticated and authorized user, no level of encryption is going to help because they are authorized to view the data, and everything is going to be presented as decrypted data, right? So again, when we start looking at putting controls in place, it's not just about protecting the data, but also looking at who has access to the data and how do I control that access and make sure not only the access, but all the transactions that happen post-authentication are monitored so that you have control and visibility. And so we have, in the next few slides, Kartik is going to take over and explain what is the reality in terms of user credentials with respect to cloud apps that we have seen, and how can you get control of that, and what are some best practices. So let me hand it over to Kartik here.
Thanks, Krishna. Yeah, so taking over from Krishna here. So Krishna stressed the point about user accounts, the account breaches. So for that, first we need to understand what are the different user accounts which the user would be using. So we are dividing the enterprise landscape into two parts. The one is the unsanctioned app and another is the sanctioned app. So sanctioned apps are applications which the IT is aware of. The IT is aware of what are the user credentials being used for authenticating and creating user accounts for the sanctioned apps. And unsanctioned apps are the apps where user goes ahead and creates accounts. So there are many, we have seen cases where many enterprise users create accounts on unsanctioned apps with enterprise username, but their own password. And most of the times, even though they say the best practice is to have different passwords for different accounts, we'll end up using the same for most, right? So let us take a real world scenario. So this particular scenario is not a fictional scenario. It's basically that of a giant financial institution, and they use UPNs for Office 365. They have, and basically for OneDrive they use the UPNs. For their general email, they have the separate email ID, and they use employee ID for authenticating to Salesforce, and they use different usernames for the different unsanctioned apps. Right, so the IT is aware of the one which is rolled out by them, that is basically the sanctioned apps, the Office 365, the Salesforce, but IT is not aware of the other set of usernames, like the employees using the same corporate email or corporate UPN as usernames on other sanctioned apps. So this is what spells a need that all of these have to be identified with a single unique user identity. So that's where we see the need that there should be a one single unique ID which is required to correlate all of these different identities of the user. So so first we looked at the different set of apps, then the different set of user identities being used. So what is the right way to architect a particular enterprise landscape to ensure that we have all the sanctioned and unsanctioned applications under the ambit of the IT? Right, so let's first look at from where the users can come in. The users can access from multiple devices. A device could be a managed device, that's a corporate IT issued device, or a personal device, right? And also the user could be coming in from remote locations, like the user may not be on the enterprise network, right? By not being on the enterprise network, so the IT admin will not have visibility of what he's doing. So a user could be coming in from a coffee shop, from any hotel, and the third category is the users who are accessing from the enterprise, right? So that is where the IT admin would have almost entire control of what the user is accessing. So we need a solution which is going to address all the three use cases: any devices, from any users, from any location, right? So for that, we would need to have a combination of SSO and a CASB. CASB is Cloud Access Security Brokers. So an SSO will give you the access control at the entry level. By that we mean the authentication, it is decided what user has access to, right? And CASB will give you the transactional level visibility. By transactional level visibility, I mean what the user, let's take a case of Box, right? If a Box has been rolled out in an enterprise, what the user is uploading to the Box app, what the user is downloading from Box. So these are the individual transactions. So a CASB can help correlate all the different user identities being used for all the unsanctioned as well as the sanctioned apps, right? The sanctioned apps, so a strong recommendation we make for enterprise admins is basically to have the SSO enabled for all and majority of the apps as possible. But not every app supports a SAML SSO, and there are many different apps which the users are using without the knowledge of the IT admin, right? That's what we call unsanctioned applications, right? So we basically recommend enterprise admins to have a combination of SSO and CASB for correlating the different transactions and the different user identities. So one of the use cases of what advantages you will have if you have the identities correlated and stitched together is what is being described here. So we are taking just one of the many use cases which the CASB can help solve. Let's assume that the user is trying to access a particular SaaS application. Let's assume it's a Google Drive. And when the user is authenticating to the Google Drive, and if the SSO is set up, it will trigger the identity provider for authentication. An identity provider can communicate with a CASB to detect any anomalies or any credential breaches at this point, and issue either a forced password reset. Say for example, CASB can consolidate and maintain the different user identities which are breached, right? So let's assume that user comes in with abc at somecompany.com, and when he's authenticating, so CASB knows what all are the other identities attached to the user, and if any of those identities are breached, a CASB can indicate the identity provider to issue a password reset for the user, right? This will help the protect and detect. So detect that a particular credential breached user ID was used for authenticating, right? So this is one of the use cases which you can get to when you have the different identities correlated, right? So and another use case which CASB would enable is with the transactional visibility if a user is trying to do any sensitive transactions, right? So let us assume that the user is generally from a particular location, and within a very short period, if the location of the user changed to a far different continent, so this is a particular anomaly, right? So if a user is trying to do these actions, any transactions, so a CASB will detect that there is an anomaly, and based on that, it can ask the user to step up and re-authenticate, right? By re-authenticate, it could again be a different type of authentication or a different multi-factor authentication, and only when the user authenticates and successfully proves that he is the right user who is accessing it, the access will be allowed. So in this case, the user is trying to upload a file, right? And CASB detects that there is an anomaly, and then it will force the user to go ahead with a step-up authentication, right? And where it will redirect it to an identity provider, and the identity provider, after completing the proper authentication, signals back to the CASB. That is when the transaction of the user is going to be allowed. So this, so now going ahead with what exactly is the So summarizing the things, so what we need is a proper visibility. The enterprise admin needs a complete visibility of what are the different sanctioned and unsanctioned applications, right? And the next step is to determine what all different identities are used by those different applications, right? And then we recommend going with a combination of a SSO and a CASB solution to secure both the access control as well as the transactional visibility of different applications. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think one other thing that I would like to emphasize, if it does not come out clear, is what we are telling is with an SSO, what you get is you get the first level of authentication, but many times when you look at these cloud applications, once a user establishes a session, the session lasts for maybe even a week, right? Days, if not weeks. And so during that time, unless you monitor every transaction, you could have some bad actors use an existing session or use the fact that somebody is authenticated and perform some illegal activity. So it's very important not only to look at the initial authentication and entry into the application, but to monitor every transaction. And if you come across some anomaly in the way in which a transaction is being performed, you get that extra control of having a step up or another factor of authentication, right? But again, we had only 25 minutes. We tried to put together something to give a flavor. Any questions before we end? Yeah, please.
Who or what is providing information to CASB that an account is breached? Where is that information coming from?
Okay, the question is who or how is the CASB knowing about account breaches? So there are services, subscription services that you can subscribe to that have information, that collect information from like the dark web and so on. There's a database. So one of the things is the CASB, at least the CASB that we know of at Netskope, has such a database that is collected from various different sources. And so, yeah, that's how we get it.
Second question, how do you define what an anomaly is in a transaction?
Okay, so sure. So the second question was, how do you define what an anomaly is? So anomaly, so there are two ways of detecting anomalies. Let me say one is the easy way. Easy way is what we call rule-based. If you identify that, like Kartik mentioned about the proximity anomaly, right? Like normally, let's say a user is logged in from a location, let's say Chicago, right? And then I see another login that happens, let's say 10 minutes later from like Europe, right? I know that theoretically it's not, even theoretically it's not possible for somebody to be there in these two places at the same time, right? So that's more like a rule-based thing that you can deterministically identify. But I think where it gets more interesting is machine learning based, right? Like normally we as human beings are very predictable. When we go and use an application, we use an application in a specific manner. So if you are observing users over a period of time, you can profile the users and learn the behavior of the user. Subsequently, if you find an activity that does not fit that profile, that becomes an anomaly, right? And if you detect such an anomaly, you're not blocking the transaction, you're just asking them to step up. As long as the anomaly is not giving a lot of false positives, I don't think users will mind that extra level of authentication to be sure. I'm sure you've seen this in other places, like using credit cards or doing online transactions when suddenly you're put up with a CAPTCHA, right? And the idea is very similar. They're monitoring your activity, they're profiling how you use things and trying to verify that.
Just to add to what Krishna was mentioning, so basically what we as a CASB believe in not using a sledgehammer approach of just cutting off the access for the user, right? So if it is the right user accessing the right application which is allowed for him, then we try to enable that in a more secure way by stepping up the authentication or detecting an anomaly or telling the user to reset the password. So that's what we help in provisioning for the user.
There's a question in the back. There's one there. I'll come back to you, sir.
What percentage of the customers are using CASB along with the SSO solution?
Almost.
Yeah, it's a very large percentage. Yeah. So what we have found is, okay, so let's qualify. So the question was, what percentage of customers are using CASB with an SSO? So typically what we are finding is a large percentage of customers who have sanctioned applications, things like, let's say a Salesforce or a Office 365, are always adopting some form of SSO. And so they combine that with the CASB because there are many use cases that come with a combination of the two. There are like still unsanctioned applications, right, which are not still under SSO control, but that's where a CASB comes in and provides that visibility into those unsanctioned applications so that IT can bring them into the fold of the SSO, if you will. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so regarding the statistics you showed in the beginning, how large is the average enterprise in terms of products?
Okay, so the question was, when we showed the statistics of about 1,000 applications being used, what is the average size of the enterprise? The average size of the enterprise is about 5,000 users. 5,000.
Because there must be a correlation, right? Larger enterprises probably use more applications.
Yeah, we have not split it out. Yeah, as I said, the smaller the enterprise, probably that number is a little bit high. But we have seen large financial institutions that have over 100,000 employees have more than 5,000 cloud applications.
But yeah, just to add to Krishna, so when an enterprise is told to discover the applications, they themselves are always surprised with the number of applications they used.
Any other questions? So before I, thank you for your time. Before I close, we do have, if you want to go a little bit more deeper into what a CASB does, we have a lunch and learn in the Shula's restaurant at 11:30. You'll get free lunch, but if you want to listen to me again, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.